In a previous nugget, we deployed the vCenter server appliance, and now in this nugget, we'll take a look at how we can use that to centrally manage our vSphere enterprise, including the ESXi hosts. Occasionally, it's a great idea to step back and just take a look at where we've been so far. In our nuggets so far together in this course, we've deployed 3 ESXi hosts. They're at the IP address of 192.168.1.101 for ESXi1, 102 for ESXi2, and 103 for ESXi3. We have a Windows management computer that's providing DNS, NTP, and DHCP support. It's at .100 on that same network, and we've also deployed a vCenter server appliance at .111. And that VM, that vCenter server appliance, is being hosted by our good friend, Mr. ESXi1. So our next logical step in our journey together is to go ahead and connect from our management computer over to the vCenter server appliance. And to do that, we're going to use a browser that supports Flash. And when we connect to the URL of HTTPS and then the resolvable name of our vSphere appliance / vSphere-client, that effectively is allowing us to use the vSphere web client to manage and work with the vCenter server appliance. Now, the next challenge is that once we do connect with the vSphere web client to the vCenter server appliance, the vCenter server appliance doesn't know anything about the ability to manage ESXi1 and ESXi2 and ESXi3. And that's one of the biggest reasons we're using vCenter, is so that we can centrally manage those hosts. So what we're going to do using the vSphere web client is we'll go ahead and add those ESXi hosts into the vCenter, so that the vCenter server can then go ahead and do the management of those hosts. Now, as part of that, we have some optional and some mandatory organization that we can set up inside of vCenter. And we can kind of think of it like a trickle-down approach. So for example, at the top of the hill, if we have the vCenter, inside of that vCenter, we can go ahead and we can create folders that can help us logically organize our resources and objects inside of vCenter. For example, we may have a folder and name it USA. And maybe we have another folder and we name it some other country. And yet another folder for yet a third country. And the folder idea is optional. It's not required, but you can use them if you want to. And then, for example, underneath USA, let's say we have, for example, a data center in Las Vegas. So we could create a data center, which is just a logical container where we can put our ESXi hosts. So if we create a data center and we call it LV Data Center, our next step together would then be to add these ESXi hosts and actually put them logically in the data center. So underneath the Las Vegas data center, we'd have, for example, ESXi 1, 2, and 3. We also have the ability to then manage the VMs, for example, on that ESXi host, which in our case would include our vCenter server appliance running as a VM on ESXi 1. We'd also have access to look at and manage other resources on that host. For example, network adapters we could then manage through the vCenter server appliance, or the local storage and local data stores on each of the ESXi hosts we could see and look at and manage through vCenter. That really does give us that fantastic centralized administration that vCenter was designed to do. So what we get to do right now is we'll go ahead and do a live demonstration to connect to the vCenter server appliance from our Windows machine. And then we'll create this organizational structure, and then we'll bring in the ESXi host into vCenter so that they can be centrally managed by our vCenter server. Also, I wanted to point out one thing from this point forward going in the labs that I think is pretty important to know. And that's this. This vCenter server appliance uses tons and tons of resources. And to fully initialize, it could take 4 to 5 minutes to actually be fully functional. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you're going to do the lab right after you watch this video, or even if you're going to do it right along with me during the video, I would recommend you launch the hands-on lab now to give it 5 or 6 minutes a head start to go ahead and initialize, including getting the vCenter server appliance up and ready and fully functional. And that way, when you're ready to do the lab, it'll be ready for you as well. So on our management computer, we'll start here, and that is our Windows 2016 server of DC-NUG. I also wanted to give you a heads up on a couple things I did regarding the browser. I changed the default browser on this Windows 2016 server to use Chrome as its default instead of Internet Explorer. And the short story is, it was just easier to get the Flash working with Chrome than it was, at least for me, with Internet Explorer. So that was my primary reason for changing the default browser. I also created a shortcut right here for the vSphere web client. So if we right-clicked on the vSphere web client and clicked on Properties from the dropdown, I just wanted to show you exactly the URL it's pointing to, which is https://vcsa.nuggetlab.com/vsphere-client. So it'll resolve the vcsa.nuggetlab.com over to 192.168.1.111. And then following that, the vSphere-client allows us to use the vSphere web client functionality as we communicate and work with the vCenter server appliance. So now that we've confirmed that URL, I'll go ahead and cancel that. And let's go ahead and double click on this link for the vSphere web client. So in the interest of getting the most real estate possible, I'm going to go ahead and press F11 to bring the Chrome browser full screen. And we can press F11 if we want to bring that back. And then let's log in. Now we're logging on to vCenter. And so to log on, we're going to log on as username of administrator using the domain of vsphere.local. That's what we identified when we deployed the vCenter server appliance. So if you want to use the clipboard as part of the lab environment to avoid having to retype administrator at vsphere.local, you can use that feature. Or you can just manually type it in. It works either way. And then in the password field, we'll supply the lab password, which once again, we can use the clipboard feature in the lab environment to apply that. So with administrator at vsphere.local and the password supplied, we'll go ahead and click login. And then we'll give it a few moments to go ahead and get everything ready for us. This is also a good time to reinforce the idea that launching the lab early, let's say 5 or 6 minutes before you intend to use it, will save you a bunch of time right here as well. Or if you just launch the lab and then you click on that shortcut for the vSphere web client and it has some type of a message like the server's not ready or the URL is bad, it's very likely that if you just started the lab, the vCenter server appliance has not fully initialized yet, and you can just wait a couple more minutes and then try it again. So again, the short lesson is launch the lab 5 or 6 minutes at least before you intend to use it, and that way you won't have to wait. So by default, in the navigator pane over here on the left, it's showing us vcsa.nuggetlab.com. And also by default, the very first tab is the Getting Started tab, which is going to have information and help regarding whatever it is we're focused on. And these are kind of useful on what the various objects are and what they do here in the vSphere web client. And if we don't want the Getting Started tab available to us, what we could do is go up to Help, use the drop down, and simply select Hide all of the Getting Started pages. And that way it's one less tab. And if you ever need it back, you can go back to Help from the drop down and you can show the Getting Started pages. Another option that we have in these panes is we have the little push pin right here. So regarding recent objects, it's going to list all the objects that you've been looking at. So if you need to go back to when you looked at a few minutes ago, you can go ahead down to the recent objects, click on it, and it'll take you back to that point. And if we click the push pin, it'll minimize this pane down here to the bottom. So we'll get more real estate. The same thing for recent tasks. It'll show us all the recent tasks. And if we want to minimize that, we can go ahead and click the push pin, which will minimize it for us. We have a similar function for work in progress and alarms. Again, we can use the push pin just to minimize those to the side, which will give us more real estate to work here. So let's do that. With recent objects, we'll click on the push pin to minimize that. Then for recent tasks, we'll click on the push pin to minimize that. And then for alarms, the push pin to minimize that. And then work in progress, we'll go ahead and click the push pin to minimize that. And have no fear, they haven't gone too far. There's the links for them right there that will bring them back. All right, so because we're on the Getting Started tab for the vCenter server, we have links that can teach us more about folders and data centers, which are organizational objects inside of vSphere. And if we wanted to create a new data center, we could click right here. And that would actually start the wizard to create a data center right here under this vCenter server. Another way that we could create folders and data centers would be to simply right-click over here on the left in the navigator pane on this vCenter server. And then from here, we could go ahead and select New Folder or New Data Center. So based on our plan, let's create a new folder for organizational purposes. And let's call it USA for United States of America and click OK. And there's our folder. So if we go ahead and click on the arrow to the left of it to expand it, currently we have nothing inside of that USA folder. Next, if we wanted to create a data center under that USA folder, we could right-click on USA. And it's worth noting a second time that because we right-clicked on USA, the drop-down is going to be regarding the USA folder. So this is the telltale sign right there. These are the actions regarding the USA folder. So if we wanted to create a new data center under the USA folder, we'd simply click on the New Data Center option in the drop-down. So let's click on New Data Center. It's asking us what we want to name it. Let's go ahead and name it based on our plan, LV Data Center. and it's going to be placed in the USA folder. So we'll click on OK. And there it is. So we can also collapse these as well. So if we collapse everything, it hides those objects, and by clicking on that little arrow to the left of the object, we can go ahead and expand or collapse it. So here under the Las Vegas Data Center, if we expand that, currently we don't have anything in it yet. And with the Las Vegas Data Center selected, the Getting Started tab tells us that, hey, this would probably be a great opportunity to add a host, an ESXi host. It explains what a host is, and by bringing the host into vCenter and placing them in a data center, gives us the ability for vCenter to go ahead and manage those ESXi hosts. And they refer to it as adding a host to the inventory. That would be the inventory of vCenter. And to add a host, it's really simple to do it. We could right-click on the data center, and then for the drop-down regarding that data center, we could click on Add Host. So let's add ESXi1, that host, to this data center so that vCenter can manage it. And we could put in the host name that's resolvable or the IP address. So for the host name, let's use ESXi-1, and the host is resolvable either as ESXi-1 or ESXi-1.nuggetlab.com. And so because it's resolvable either way, I'll go ahead and call it ESXi-1, and we'll click on Next to continue. Next, vCenter is saying, you know what, I need some credentials so I can talk to this ESXi host and get the ball rolling. So we'll put the username and password that has administrative rights on that ESXi host, which the username is root, and the password on ESXi1 is our lab password. So with that supplied, we'll click on Next. It's giving us the SHA-1 thumbprint of the self-signed certificate that's on ESXi1. If we weren't sure we're connected to the right ESXi host, we could go to that host on the direct console user interface, and from the menu system on the DCUI, we could actually see the SHA-1 thumbprint of that self-signed certificate. So we'll go ahead and click on Yes to continue. It's giving us a host summary. We'll go ahead and click on Next to continue. And it's now giving us the opportunity to assign a license. And in preparation for this lab, I've already assigned a license to the ESXi host. And so by default, it's going to accept that license that's on the ESXi host. And all we need to do is click on Next to continue. Next, it's asking us about lockdown mode for the ESXi host. If we select the radio button for strict, effectively, the direct console user interface at the host itself, that service is stopped, which implies that the only way we're going to be able to manage that ESXi host is through vCenter. Or, if we don't want to lock it down that tight, we could say we want lockdown mode to be normal, and that would allow the local console or the vCenter server. Or we could leave it as disabled and not turn on lockdown mode. So it depends on how secure of an environment you're in and how tight you want the controls to be. So for our lab, for the moment, we'll go ahead and leave lockdown mode as disabled and click on Next. Next, it's asking us regarding the VMs on this ESXi host, where do we want to place them? So if we had some, for example, VM folders set up, we could actually specify those folders, and that's where the VMs would show up in the user interface on vCenter. At the moment, we don't have any folders underneath Las Vegas Data Center for VMs, so we'll simply select Las Vegas Data Center and click on Next. It's giving us a summary of what's about to happen, and we'll click on Finish. Then we'll give that a few moments to go ahead and think about life. And in a moment, over here on the left, under the Navigator pane, it's going to go ahead and show us the ESXi1 host under the Las Vegas Data Center. So it's got a little red icon next to it for a moment until it's fully initialized and connected and up, and now it looks perfectly normal. Also, up here we have a refresh icon. So if we have data on the screen and we think, wow, that looks stale, or is that the most recent, we can go ahead and click on refresh, and that'll go ahead and refresh the screen for us. And then next to ESXi-1, if we expand that, it's going to show us the virtual machine, which is our vCenter server appliance that's running as a VM on that ESXi host. So that's one host down and 2 ESXi hosts to go to be incorporated as part of vCenter. So to bring in the other 2, we'll do them one at a time. We'll right-click on the Las Vegas Data Center. And from the Actions drop-down for the Las Vegas Data Center, we'll click on Add Host. And then we'll repeat the process for ESXi2. So we'll put in the resolvable name for ESXi-2 and click on Next. We'll put in the credentials that are local on ESXi-2, which are root, with our lab password, and click on Next. There's the SHA-1 thumbprint if we want to verify that regarding the self-signed certificate on ESXi2. We'll go ahead and click on Yes to continue. There's the host summary. We'll click Next to continue. We'll accept the license that I also applied to ESXi2 and click on Next. We'll leave lockdown mode disabled as well. Click Next. And then for any VMs, we'll also put them right in the Las Vegas data center. Now, ESXi2 and ESXi3, they don't have any VMs yet, and we'll click on Next. And then there's a summary, and then we'll click on Finish. And then we'll follow the same process to add ESXi3. So we'll right-click on the Las Vegas data center. From the drop-down, select Add Host. We'll type in ESXi-3, click Next. We'll put in the username of root with our lab password, which is the local user root on ESXi3. Click on Next. Click on Yes regarding the self-signed certificate. There's the host summary. We'll click on Next. And we're going to accept the license that I placed over on ESXi-3 and click on Next. And regarding licenses, in another nugget, I will walk you through how to both input and apply licenses for both vCenter as well as ESXi hosts. For now, we're focused on the functionality of getting vCenter set up and importing the ESXi hosts. So we'll leave lockdown mode disabled. We'll click on Next. We don't have a separate location for the VMs on ESXi3 if they existed, which they don't. We'll click on Next. So here's our summary of what's about to happen, and we'll click on Finish. And in just a few moments, on the navigator pane here on the left, ESXi3 will show up. And again, if we need to, we can click on the refresh icon up here to refresh the display. So there's our 3 ESXi hosts. We have ESXi 1, 2, and 3, all incorporated in our Las Vegas data center within a folder called USA as part of our vSphere management system called vCenter. And if we go to our recent tasks, we have adding our 3 standalone hosts. And if we caught this sooner, it would have also showed us the creation of the Las Vegas data center and also the USA folder. And so to minimize the recent tasks, we can click on recent tasks here, and that will re-minimize it for us. So in this nugget, we set up some organization inside of vCenter using the vSphere web client. We created a folder called USA, a data center called LV Data Center, and then we brought in the 3 ESXi hosts as part of that data center, so that now we can manage and work with those ESXi hosts and their VMs as part of vCenter. And now, my friend, it is your turn. So in the hands-on lab, practicing what we've just gone through together will help reinforce those skills and the learning that's taking place. So have some fun with the lab, and I'll see you in the next video. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.